Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com.
Good day to you all. Welcome to the new. I'm your host, Randy Pearl. And today we have an actual special guest with us today by the name of John K. Uhler. He is a founder and director of SurvivorSupport.net, excuse me. And we'll be bringing him on here in a couple of minutes. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and let you know what he looks like. John is currently a host of the TECN TV's weekly counseling program, Journey to Healing. He is a licensed professional counselor with professional experience spanning nearly 30 years. He has worked in both clinical and administrative capacities in outpatient settings with individuals, couples, and families, in hospital settings, in intensive day treatment settings, in residential treatment programs, and in secure, locked facilities. He spent years working with sexual abuse survivors, treating teens deemed to be multiple placement failures and severely emotionally disturbed who had been placed within residential treatment by either the foster care system or the juvenile justice system. Lastly, he spent over a decade working and researching intensively within the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections Psychology Department as a psychological services specialist, where he established the nation's first intensive treatment program within long-term solitary confinement, then oversaw the treatment of one of the specialized high-intensity sex offender treatment units, treating male offenders deemed to be high-risk and sexually violent predators. During those years, he not only conducted low and high-intensity sex offender treatment and conducted hundreds of sex offender psychological assessments for parole determination, but also worked with thousands of incarcerated male sex offenders within a prison general population, with male offenders representing the full continuum of sexual offenses from date rape to serial rapists and murderers. He is forensically certified in the PCL-R, the hair psychopathy checklist, and holds the record for logging more clinical contact hours within a solitary confinement environment than any other psychology staff member within the United States. Along with his clinical work, he has also served as the adjunct faculty member for a Christian college teaching subjects related to counseling, human services, and abnormal psychology. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I introduce you all to John Uhler.
Well, Randy, thank you. It's a privilege to be with you. Privileged to be with another host of the Exceptional Conservative Network.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for being part of my program today. Wow, John, I would say you have quite the impressive resume. It is, that is some phenomenal stuff. So, let me make sure I didn't cut you off here. Okay. So, John, what motivated you to join this profession?
Good question. I think I ask myself that a lot. um, I really enjoy the field of counseling. Once upon a time, I wanted to fly off of aircraft carriers, so I wanted to fly for the Marines.
Mm.
That didn't work because I ended up needing glasses, and at that time, you couldn't have glasses. So that changed things for me, and that was about the time that the Lord was really getting a hold of me. That was senior year of high school. So I felt called into the ministry. And so was heading into vocational ministry, but then decided to make some changes because I was finding that I was getting a little burned out doing youth work. Not so much working with the kids, but doing programming. But here for the rest of my career, was doing programming. But really enjoyed doing teaching and counseling and was following James Dobson. And it was his work that really opened my eyes to the field of counseling, and so the rest is history. So
Okay.
that's how I ended up changing from a biblical studies major after my 2 years of Greek into the field of counseling.
Wow. Wow. Okay. That's interesting because when I was in high school, it was difficult for people to get into the military, especially those specialized, I guess you would say, branches within the military. If you had issues with seeing, if you had flat-footed, I had to get a waiver to join the military because I had flat foot at the time, and so it was crazy. I also had a history of asthma, but because it was such a from childhood to my going into adulthood, it was a gap. They were just like, okay, you might not have it anymore. So I was able to join the army with all of that going on. And so I
That's
totally
right.
understand with the specifications there. Yeah, that's amazing. So tell us more about this your survivorsupport.net.
Yeah, survivorsupport.net is really my ministry for those that have been impacted directly or indirectly by sexual abuse, though it's actually far more than that now. Part of my career, actually, sort of the beginning third, was working with survivors, though I didn't know that's what I was going to be doing. I think the Lord has a unique way of directing us.
Mm-hmm.
I had never been trained in either going through Talmud School of Theology or even at Cal State Fullerton, which is where I completed my master's program in. I didn't have one course on trauma, the effects of trauma, so I didn't know what happens when somebody goes through a lot, especially the result of sexual abuse. If you don't know that, if you don't know of it, then you really can't conceive of it. And so you can't imagine. When I became aware of it, I started to work with a lot of folks. They started to come onto my caseload. And I think that was the Lord to help me really hone my understanding of really the depths of what can happen, not just the types of perpetration, but the effects. So, one of my strengths is really in trauma based disorders, especially as a result of sexual abuse. I then transitioned to working with kids in the system. That's actually how I can be so confident about the trans deception, because I worked with the most profound type of cases. This was out in Southern California in both group homes and residential treatment. So I can speak definitively to that population. And from that, I am warn uh, people about this grand deception that is taking our kids,
Mm-hmm.
using it as a means of exploiting kids. So nefarious adults are using vulnerable kids and manipulating them for their own designs, for the perpetrator's designs. And I use perpetrator in a broad sense.
Right.
You can have financial perpetrators, you can have sexual perpetrators, you can have perpetrators that are big pharma. If you're using anybody and you're manipulating somebody, you're getting over on them. If you're benefiting at their expense without them knowing it, then
Mm-hmm.
you're a perpetrator. Sometimes
Yes.
even if they do know it, but if you have power over them. The last portion of my career had to do with working on psychology staff in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections for a little over 11 years. I stayed a year beyond which I could retire and then finally decided to retire. I started churchprotect.org that is actually still in operation. I felt compelled to talk to Christians, but especially churches, what they don't know, meaning what I found out while working with the most sophisticated of sexual predators. On church staff, when I was on church staff, I didn't know. Pastors and others on church staff in the vast majority of states are mandated reporters, but they don't know what to look for typically. Most mandated reporting courses will kind of focus on, really, in a way, almost the rare cases, the snatch and grab kind of situation. The vast majority of perpetrators are not that. They actually do not fit into the profile of the Hare psychopathy checklist. Robert Hare did an amazing job looking at the brain scans of psychopaths. I'm certified in that. There's two kinds of psychopaths, by the way. There's the kind that we all have, the Alfred Hitchcock crazy person. We call that a bloody psychopath. But that's very few and far between, all things being equal. The most prolific and profound types of psychopaths are what's called white-collar psychopaths. That's the Bill and Hillary Clinton. That's the Bernie Madoff. Those are people on Wall Street, in politics, in the used car sales lot, on the new car sales, wherever we find them. They're all over the place, quite frankly. Robert Hare and James Allen think they're few and far between. Well, that's because of their own criteria. Robert Hare did a wonderful job, but he's missed some things. And so someday maybe I'll publish. I'm so bold as to say that he's missed some things, but he didn't work in depth behind the scenes with inmates. And although it's interesting because Robert Hare himself said if he hadn't worked with guys in prison, meaning the subjects that he studied as far as brain scans were men from prison, which everybody understood based upon offense. Those are the guys that he studied. But he himself said that if he hadn't studied men in prison, he would study men on Wall Street. Well, what does that tell you? So they aren't one in a million.
Yes.
I use on my own show, my podcast, I've used it a lot and actually now feature it in some of the previous editions that people can go on to survivorsupport.net under podcasts. We analyze the movie Tangled, or I use that. So the movie Tangled, that is based upon the story of Rapunzel. If you watch that, it's Disney's film. They've done a brilliant job. It's far and few between, or few and far between, that Disney does something right. With that one, they got it really right. And Mother Gothel is the woman that stole this child to use her hair as the fountain of eternal youth, basically for herself. So this child is raised by this single mother. The child doesn't know she's been kidnapped, and she thinks that Mother Gothel is her mother. And as the story unfolds, most of us know the story of Rapunzel, where she lets down her hair and people climb up them. But Disney did a wonderful job, and so I use that as analyzing selfish people and look at degrees of selfishness. And so remove the fancy term of psychopath or psychopathy or sociopathy. And the difference, quite frankly, a lot of people have different categories as far as a psychopath is uniquely different or distinctly different from a sociopath. It's not. The way to view the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, as well as a narcissist, the best way to view it is this. Though they've found genetic markers, and that's fine. But if that were to be the case, then every set of twins where someone was a bloody psychopath, you'd have the other one become a bloody psychopath. And by the way, bloody psychopaths don't have many victims in terms of body count, and that sounds crass to put it that way. But think about the most prolific serial murderer, and I've worked with men that have done heinous things. But you think about the most prolific serial murderer, and you will be into the 10s, 20s, 30s, sometimes 80s and 90s. I'm not minimizing that whatsoever. But think about Bernie Madoff. When he made off with everybody's money, how many victims did he have? And he bled them dry financially. Right. So a psychopath is really, depending upon what track they take, so to speak, to become who they are. The working definition of a psychopath has 3 points to it. And then you'll see how really it's a modern version of a reprobate mind, quite frankly. A psychopath is someone that does not have a conscience. Why? They weren't born that way. It's neither nature or nurture. It's neither. I mean, all of that kind of plays in sometimes, but we also know people that went through a lot of difficult things and didn't become psychopaths. So how do you explain that? The only way to explain it is this. Violating one's conscience is by choice, over time, incrementally, and you do it enough, and your conscience won't work. If your conscience no longer works, and it's on a continuum, because as it's becoming easier to override your conscience, which is always by choice, then you stop caring about the impact you have on someone else. So there goes empathy, and you're not sorry. So you don't have remorse. So a psychopath is someone that doesn't have a conscience, therefore they can do things to other people without feeling badly about it, the impact on them, the victim. So someone without a conscience will not have remorse. Therefore, they're actually beyond repentance. They've been given over, and that's Romans 1. And in the church, we have an issue with that. We will give lip service to the veracity of Scripture and the authority and inspiration of it and the plenary inspiration. But when it comes to really looking at Romans chapter 1, and if you ask someone, is there a point beyond which someone can go where they are no longer able to be redeemed? Now watch Christians start to squirm. Say, well, no, everybody, that's not what Romans chapter 1 says. Right? That somebody's gone too far where they've been given over, and really what happens is, this is part of the fear of the Lord, by the way, and I use this as I see the realm of counseling, that I can go far enough where, right, Pharaoh hardened his heart and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So what happened is Pharaoh said yes and God said, yeah, absolutely. So what happens is God removes the ability to ever want anything other than you want, and you want it more. So you look at somebody that is steeped in self and they want to become better at gaming or getting over on someone, being the top dog, the alpha male. They have disdain for Boy Scouts. So all the good character qualities, where once upon a time they used to love people and use things, they've now inverted it.
Yeah.
And there's no coming back from that. Why? Because they'll never want to come back. You talk to a really selfish person and suggest they not be selfish, and where are they going to stare? They'll stare at you. Yeah, where are they going to say? Right, you go do you, I'm doing me. There, and that there's no hope for that person. But they don't care because they never think in those terms, because they just really like doing what they're doing. They don't know it's a judgment by God. They've been given over to that. So you hurt somebody long enough, and God will say, that's how you will be. And meanwhile, that person's piling up judgment more and more.
So, on that point, so you explain what a psychopath is. How would that? What is a sociopath?
Oh yes, and I'm sorry I didn't complete that.
No worries. Because I'm going somewhere next with that.
There you go. The difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, and I think my theory is correct, but I actually know I'm correct. To be a sociopath, it presupposes you already are a narcissist. You have a low-level narcissist. They look in mirrors. They are attracted at their own reflection. They carry combs and brushes, and they're always checking themselves out. Well, that's a low-level narcissist.
Yeah.
A sophisticated narcissist doesn't look in the mirror, but it's all about them. They are the center of the universe, and you better recognize it. Okay. You keep going. So if you allow your selfishness to become unmoored, and it'll start building like a snowball, and it starts to grow. You first begin to think more of yourself than someone else, and then you begin to think you're a little more entitled than somebody else, and then you begin to justify and rationalize, and now you really have some self-entitlement going on, and now you're starting to do you, and it's all about you. Now you're a narcissist, because your needs, what you perceive to be needs, how you discern or how you describe that, but it's really all about you. Okay?
Right.
That's a narcissist. So a sloppy, lazy, low-level narcissist is is the one that lets people see self-aggrandizing. That's low-level stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So and they won't get very far.
Hmm.
But you look in business now, you look in the military, wherever you want to, in the rank and order of things, sadly, what's happened in our country is you better really be able to have a good self-esteem and walk all over people if you want to get to the top. Well, that's a narcissist. So,
Exactly. And and not to cut you off, but that is one of the things that's promoted in our society. Just like you just
absolutely
the
was.
point that you made is if you're when you're doing, because I've done several interviews with CEOs and business owners and what have you, and for jobs or just in conversation and just probing their minds. And that is one of the things that how do you sell yourself? What can you tell
That's
me?
right.
How can you convince me? So you have to kind of self-grandize yourself and
That's right.
over exaggerate certain areas of your life to almost to the point of narcissism, just to convince somebody that you're even worthy of their time.
That's
And
right.
it's so funny that you said it, because now it leads into going
The
back to
sociopath.
2016 all the way through 2019. Well, I even say 2020. The different psychologists, psychiatrists, and everything else that was getting time slots on mainstream media. They were in an abstract diagnosing President Trump as different categories. But you heard he was a psychopath,
Yeah.
but based on
And
definition.
that's because those clinicians, I'll be so bold, nobody knows who I am yet because I'm not published. I love to debate any of them.
Yep, yep.
Because how much time did they spend on psychopaths? The greatest psychopaths that everybody will recognize, psychopaths, other than politicians in the House of Representatives with Pelosi, right? Where are you going to find? It'll be in prison. Okay. So if you tell me you are an expert in psychopaths, tell me how many years you've worked and in what way and in what at it than they are so that you can get meaningful information. You have to be better at thinking like a psychopath than a psychopath is so that you can derive meaningful information from the world's greatest sneaky liars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you're not going to get that in a sterile environment and sitting in an interview room for 3 hours with a psychopath behind bars that he knows stuff's, people are listening to him. And plus, unless you understand for the psychopath, as a matter of fact, here's the difference between the sociopath and psychopaths, to understand that most researchers are being played by psychopaths, but it's not that you can't derive meaningful information from it. But if you really want the goods on psychopaths, if you think you're interviewing them the same way you're interviewing somebody else, you either are dangerously ignorant or you're pompous and arrogant. Because I used to listen to the guys when they would come back from the interviews, as I was working full-time in solitary confinement for 6 solid years, I would listen to them laughing and laughing at what they told the interviewer. And what a putz they view the interviewer as. Oh, they just have a great time. Now, does the interviewer know they've been played? And the ones that play it the most are the sex offenders. Yet we're going to do significant research on sex offenders from people that work in academia and have 3 hours with the world's greatest liars. And they will take that and now they're going to put it in peer-reviewed literature when the peer reviewers have never worked behind bars.
Work. Yeah.
Okay, and now we're going to take that and we're going to then craft certain things in such a way that we actually change legislation and judicial opinions on who should get out. And we're also going to craft sex offender treatment assessments so that in California we can release non-violent sex offenders that have scored low on the static 99, which is absolutely flawed for sex offenders. And so now we have, in reality, very heinous sex offenders being released from prison because the researchers were played or they have an agenda. That's why this is really serious stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference between a sociopath, so the in-between stage, and the best way to view it is on a scale of 1 to 10, a downhill path, kind of a terraced, like not terrorist, but a kind of a terracing. So it's staggered stages by stages of selfishness. things happen. If it's on a scale of 1 to 10, the person that's in category 1 is different than category 2 and category 3 and category 4. They think differently. They see the world differently. They interact differently. They are motivated differently. They reason differently. And you had better know it. Why? Because they're coming to church. And they're playing people. And they're living in 2 Peter chapter 2. And very few churches, church leaders, leadership boards can have, they don't have clue one. And so we end up then opening doors to a bunch of predators and telling the victims or survivors they need to just suck it up and forgive. And that's why so many people just walk away from the church, the true survivors. But anyway, so a sociopath, the difference between, so you have to move through narcissism and now it grows. So you don't leave narcissism, it's the basis. Now, as it grows, you're going to move into professional grade manipulation, otherwise known as sales. And now you're a great salesperson. Okay. Sociopaths are salesmen, people. Okay. Will be able that you are working them. One is very overt and you'll end up in prison, or you work for the IRS. The other is very covert and you will stand up and willingly take out your checkbook or your credit card or put it in the plate if you're in Joel Osteen's church, right? They're manipulating you, but you actually don't know you're being manipulated and you go along with it and you think it's wonderful. Now you have the makings of a cult. So a sociopath is a salesman, but here's the difference. So a narcissist, it's all about them, but they aren't quite yet at the proficient stages of working people. So if somebody's just a narcissist, they have rough edges and people kind of know, but it's still all about them. If he wants to really, he or she, Mother Gothel is the one, if she really wants to take it up, kick it up a notch, take it to the next level, he has to become polished, right? A rough narcissist doesn't get all that far. But you want to start working things on a professional grade level. Now you're going to go to the business, you're going to go to the business management seminars. You're going to begin to work on presentation. Now you're a wolf in sheep's clothing. However, the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, number one is by degree. Psychopath is further down, but here's the difference. A sociopath operates on cost benefits. When the cost begins to outweigh the benefits, they will move on without much without fear or complaint. You watch on a car lot, and if a guy has to spend, if the salesperson has to spend just a little too much with that couple, he'll politely excuse it. He doesn't say, "You guys are idiots," and he moves on. He makes up an excuse. He says, "Hey, back." So he moves on. Why? Because there's another couple over there. He's got to move on. He doesn't take it personally. It's all pragmatism. The psychopath has shifted now into, for the psychopath, it's not about sales. It's about other things, which has to do with power, control, but now even one better, or one, the effect he or she can have upon someone. And the greatest kind of psychopath, meaning someone moves into that arena, it's no longer about what's in it for them. Doesn't matter. As far as they can burn the whole place down as long as they're sitting on top of the ashes. Why? Because the psychopath will have, by nature, they will have to have the last laugh, the last word, and the last. And that's why Satan won't give it up. If anybody can read perfect Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, it's Satan. Why does he can read the end of the book? Why didn't he just give it up and repent? It's not in him, number one. He's the consummate psychopath. Why doesn't he give it up? Right? Because he doesn't believe it. Because he will have the last word, last say, last laugh. And where I used to believe, and a lot of pastors I've listened to, and I used to believe this as well, I used to believe hell was going to be filled with people whose consciences finally came back alive, and now they are filled with regret and remorse forever. on the one hand, I'm sort of okay with that definition, but that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
You want to create the greatest kind of pain for psychopaths because, by the way, somebody in hell, if they had a chance to do it again, they wouldn't do anything differently. They're not sorry. So they are
True.
psychopaths, by the way. Everybody
True.
that goes to hell, that's worth pondering. Are you ready?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
The
great point, though.
reason there's going to
That's
be
a great point.
wailing and gnashing of teeth in hell is because God had the final say. And who does he think he is? God? Because after all, they were starting their spiel. Lord, didn't we do wonderful things? Like you should give me fanfare as I walk in here. Did wonderful things. And they start rattling off their resume, and the Lord says, depart from me, I never knew you, you worker of iniquities. Trapdoor goes down, they go straight to hell, they don't pass go, they don't collect $200, and there's wailing and gnashing of teeth because emerging from them is pure self. And it is, how dare you tell me or think you have the last word. That's the wailing and gnashing of teeth. I've seen that in solitary, and it's something to behold. When a psychopath gets finally is put in his place,
Mm-hmm.
he will not submit to that, and he will actually start slamming his adult face into concrete. That's how much they hate somebody getting over on them. If I'd never seen it, I never would have believed it. But having seen it for years and years, it's quite something. So that's what a psychopath is. So for a psychopath, what drives them is making sure that people will know that they are number one. That's not cost factor analysis. That's why they'll burn it to the ground as long as they have the satisfaction of being able to stand on the pile of ashes. A sociopath will look at that and say, you're crazy, man. You just burned up everything you worked for. Why are you doing that? They don't understand a psychopath.
Good point. Yeah. I didn't think about it that way. Yeah. Wow. That was succinct. That was awesome. That was perfect. So I'm like I'm hesitant to go and take a break. So I'm just gonna push through. Do you need to take a break?
Okay. All right. No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. So I'll ask then. We'll continue on because this is awesome stuff, and I know our audiences is probably appreciate this stuff. What has been some of the emerging trends with teens that lead to sexual related trauma, like we just talked about a little while ago with the transgenderism movement targeting kids. So I would kind of assume that that's probably part of it, to a degree, but also from the violent aspect. So what are your thoughts on that? Like what have you been seeing as far as like the trend analysis there?
I'm going to credit Judith Reisman. She and I became good friends before she passed away just recently. I'm going to credit her with starting to open my eyes to how much deception in the field of psychology that there is as far as what we've come to believe, what we're taught, that children are sexual from birth, and therefore they act out or they play, they will be prone to be sexual. What's happened as a result of that is a whole lot of missed cues of kids that have been perked on, number one. If I believe kids are sexual from birth, now are kids sexual, given enough time, once they hit puberty, it'll emerge.
Right.
But here's one thing that people need to understand. Prior to puberty, a child will never have a sexualized or sexual thought unless it is introduced to them from the outside. That's why little boys and girls play together. They may look at each other's anatomy for a moment, but that's about it. They're not going to do this exploratory thing. They'll kind of look and, oh, okay, what do you have? And they move on.
Right.
They don't give it a second thought.
Yeah.
If you have a child that has become, shall we say, fixated or really investigating, which involves another kid, he or she's acting something out. And the question is, where did they get that? Because prior to puberty, a child does not have actual sexual thoughts like we think. As a matter of fact, most of us can remember where puberty kicked in, and the boys or the girls, depending upon your gender, all of a sudden you sort of notice And if you noticed before the rest of the kids in your class were kind of awakening, you thought there was something strange with you. Because at first, kids will play together. There's no issue, boys and girls, they don't care. And then they go through that magical stage of the opposite gender has cooties, right? So boys and girls don't want to play at all together. And then they start to eventually come back around, and that's where we used to call them tomboys, and that's what unfortunately is going on with the trans movement. They're playing upon very normal things, and they're confusing kids. But I remember girls used to play football, or guys, I don't know, they can do some girl things. It's just not an issue. It only becomes an issue when somebody makes it an issue, or when somebody introduces sexualized ideas or concepts. That's called grooming. In this day and age, ever since porn, now there's always been grooming throughout human history, unfortunately, as long as there's been sin.
Yeah.
So every generation, every people group, you're going to see the perpetration against kids.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it right. But compared to nowadays, what you have different in society is simply this. With the introduction of porn, now you didn't have to go peeking in a window once you became more deviant, meaning it took less work, and younger kids could be introduced for the very first time. I mean, if you're an adult and you want to go peep in a window, imagine if you're carrying a kid on your shoulder, you want to introduce him, it doesn't work very well. So for now, for the very first time, when porn started, when Playboy started, boys would have the centerfold and they'd hide it, they'd go out on the playground and they're sharing it. That's nothing now.
Right.
I don't even know half of what's out there, to be honest. I can only imagine, but I've learned probably what most people don't know because I worked with the most high intensity of sex offenders. I've read hundreds and hundreds of police reports and all the evaluations, and all those guys that offend go to prison, and they were in the likes of my groups. I'm a certified sex offender treatment provider. So, certified in the Harris Psychopathy checklist. So, but that doesn't mean I know all of what's out there, and I don't want to, but I really do sort of know vicariously because I work with the guys. But I can tell you this, when you have a 14-year-old boy that killed a 13-year-old cheerleader, what do you think he did and why? And if you don't first go to Pornhub, if your mind doesn't say, you know what, he sexually assaulted her and he murdered her because he's been accessing stuff on Pornhub, if that's not, unfortunately, if that's not where your mind goes now, you're dangerously naive. So what's happened in our culture is the hypersexualization through porn and the internet. Stuff has been now flooded in, and now look at what Disney's doing. So it's been, you look at back in the 60s or the 50s, howdy doody.
Yeah.
And where we are now, and what's rated now versus back then, you cannot tell me this is not purposeful in design. Why? Because the CIA and the Rockefeller Foundation, and we can credit Judith Reisman for this, she investigated the connection that people at very high levels wanted to change the U.S. Well, how do you do that? A lot of different ways. But one key way is you attack the morals, because the thing that set the U.S. aside from any country in the world, if the U.S. hadn't been there, what would have happened in World War II? What would have happened in World War I? There wouldn't have been D-Day. We'd all be speaking German or Japanese right now. Yeah, flaws, but added. Now, there's no country adding more garbage, quite frankly, now in the U.S. And thank you, the Biden administration, for opening the floodgates for all that and won't prosecute Pornhub or anything like that. But there's been a flood of stuff. And what's happened is kids are now being exposed to, and intentionally so, and that's called grooming. Can kids accidentally have? Yeah, but who's producing the stuff, getting into the hands of kids? So what you have now is this. You have generations that have been primed and impacted by porn. I mean, to think that you would have what used to be in the Middle Ages, a method of extracting information or torturing someone. Now it's viewed as entertainment called 50 Shades of Grey. Yeah. What in the world has happened to society? I was in prison in doing sex offender treatment. When that movie came out on Valentine's Day, and I interviewed the guys, what they thought about it. I'll tell you what they said. Part of it, they have to be good, right? I mean, they have to behave themselves because I'm writing their reports, but I can still discern anyway. But it was very interesting that pretty much the consensus was, Mr. Uhler, if we had had that, grooming would have never been so easy, and we probably wouldn't have gotten busted because they would have done the work for us. Now,
Wow.
you raise the issue of 50 Shades of Grey, and you talk about that's really heinous. People will look at you and say, what are you talking about? That's in Walmart. That's entertainment.
Yeah.
And that's only been how many years ago now? That's less than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So we now view as normal that which has to do with sexual assault. And here's what's so important that people need to understand. Sexual predators come in all shapes and sizes, and they don't think normally anymore. They are psychopaths. Their brains have changed where they are always hunting and they won't stop. Does that mean every single guy that crosses a line? Now, there's about 8 categories of sex offenders from my own research. So within the first couple of small, or none of it's small, but the first couple of categories, I believe redemption is possible. But you go far enough, that's even further than in Romans chapter 1, and now you have a man that will never come back because he loses the ability and the desire to ever want to be any other way. And now he is working on perfecting his ability to hunt and to groom and to perpetrate, and his mind. So that was a very long way, Randy, of answering the question, which is what's happened in our society is you now have victims and perpetrators, and now at a very young age. And my concern about the trans movement is this, that you have people, you have adults that will use kids and teens for profit in a couple different ways. When I say for profit, it's financial profit, or then whatever they can derive or benefit from them.
Right.
So in terms of products and sales and marketing, I mean, you watch the video I put together about understanding the trans deception. I try to highlight all the different special interests, but here's what people don't know, understood thing is that in the midst of all of that are sexual predators, and that's my concern, because you have kids that have, and kids that are in the trans movement are primarily this, the bulk of them are genuine kids. They are all screwed up, they're messed up in this sense. They're severely emotionally disturbed, they have mental health issues, that all the gender therapists and anybody connected to the gender movement that's making money off these kids are purposely overlooking the 8 primary criteria or 8 primary red flags of sexual abuse. And they're reinterpreting those as gender related. So we've got a dangerous situation because we have mandated reporters that are not doing their job. They're turning a blind eye, or they're deaf, dumb, and blind. I don't know which is worse, but you have kids that are screaming that they, as far as all the red flags, that they've been perped on, and nobody's seeing them. So now what we do is we take kids that are all messed up, that are screwed up, that are emotionally, severely emotionally disturbed. These are kids that are being manipulated. And instead of getting them help, it used to be once upon a time that psychology would say the way to help a kid is improve their self-esteem. Now the whole thing has changed to where how you're going to help a kid is whack off her breasts or cut off the penis. Really?
Yeah.
Since
that's
when
what it boiled down to.
ever?
And what pisses me off about it all, as well, is that we're trying to normalize sexual abuse. Well, it's normal, it's always been happening. It's okay. Like, no, it's not okay. Like, how do you even fit that construct, that mindset, that it's okay to abuse a child, or to not even so much abuse, but to sexually abuse a child? Yes, I'm all for spanking
Jesus.
the kid. I would.
Jesus had pretty strong things to say.
Yeah, but they're like normalizing it, and so now they're trying to build into the LGBTQ community the pedophilia aspect of it. And it's like, no. And I talked to a bunch of people in the LGBTQ community, and they're like, Yeah, I'm not for that because that's not cool. That
But you notice they
it's one
can't
thing to be
stop them.
trans, but to try to impose that onto children is the wrong answer.
Right. And
And
Randy, that's the dirty little secret behind all of this.
mm-hmm.
Okay. You have different people along the way, and people will, a lot of people will try to assert, I'm anti-trans. Try it again. Meaning anti-LBT. No, you'll never once. Go back and read or listen to anything I've ever said, and I'll never, though I may have my own thoughts about it, I will never publicly tell another adult what they should or shouldn't do with
Right.
another adult, though I have thoughts about it.
Right. Exactly.
Okay?
Bingo.
You will never find anything I've ever said or ever written. So
Mm-hmm.
do not misquote me. I'm talking to anybody out there. No.
Right.
What I've said is this. I'm highly protective of women and children and minors. Keep your hands off of them. And do
Mm-hmm.
not, under the guise of anything you want to call it,
Call it. Yep.
do not exploit their vulnerability. Do not play upon their weakness. Do not confuse their minds. Do not groom them. Do not manipulate them into molding them so they are an easy target, so you can make $120,000 off a double mastectomy for a confused kid that probably was either sexually abused on the autism spectrum, was manipulated by social media, or by peers. You will
Exactly.
not help a vulnerable young person by cutting off body parts.
Yeah.
They need to figure out what's happened so that they can't accept themselves. And the greatest concern I have is for those who have been severely sexually, there can be a splitting off on the inside because they sort of, without intending it, a trauma survivor, especially a kid though, says, this isn't happening to me, I'm out of here. So part of them sort of gets tucked away. Well,
Mm-hmm.
if that happens enough, or to a extent, we call that dissociation, what can happen is this: on the inside, they actually hear those aspects of themselves, and it's not demonic possession. And there's about 5 different reasons for it. Demonic possession is one, but it's, trust me, I've seen demonic possession. Okay, this is a very normal thing. And what happens is, just like a rape victim will take it personally, they think they've done it, they feel dirty. That's why every rape victim wants to go take a shower. These kids think it's them, they feel defective, their intuition has been overridden, so they can't reality test as far as the safety and the legitimacy of who's trying to encroach upon their boundaries. So a lot of these kids want to annihilate that part of themselves that was taken advantage of. All that has to happen now is for an adult to come along and say, you know what? What I hear you saying is you really hate being a girl. Well,
Yeah.
maybe you must be a boy, so we're now going to make money. Oh, I'm sorry, they never said.
Oh, yep.
Maybe,
Exactly.
maybe you're actually, maybe you were, here it is. Maybe you're born in the wrong body. Well, ready? If anybody tells you they're born in the wrong body, the DSM behind me says this. I'm sorry, I got a DSM here. Wait, I'll grab it for effect right here. If you look up a brief psychotic disorder, delusional disorder, I can look it up now, what you're going to find is this: somebody that believes something that is not factually accurate. If you tell a kid you're in the wrong body, that's neither measurable or observable. That's not scientific. That is a delusion. And so what's happened in psychology and psychiatry is this: we are confirming within a kid a delusion.
Mm-hmm.
And how is a kid ever supposed to get out of that? As we then take advantage of them, instead of somebody unpacking that kid and finding out in this screening process. That's why everybody's trying to fast track these kids. Give me a kid, and within a few sessions, I can find out where the gender confusion came from. Any competent therapist, actually, I can find out in 2. Any competent therapist should be able to as well. And that's why in one session, they'll give these kids letters to fast track them. And now that's why under the legislation, they want to remove it from the DSM. Why? Because the DSM requires the gatekeeping step of a mental health professional. If they can remove it from this book,
Then it doesn't
now
exist.
the nurse at the school can
Exactly.
fast track off to Planned Parenthood again. Isn't that interesting? What I tell you this: Planned Parenthood dropped women like a bad date. And the feminists will go nuclear on this. Think about it, because now they are the major player in the transgender end of things. So what that means is Planned Parenthood is making boys girls and girls boys, and what's happening to girls, because they're also in favor of men in women's sports. It is the eradication of women. This is an existential threat, and to parental rights, because you have a father sitting in prison right now in Canada because he refused to be quiet, and he refused to say his child is not going to be transitioned against basically over my dead body. Well, guess what they did? And he refused to use these stupid pronouns. And don't you ever, you want to screw a kid up, you confirm their delusion, now you really screwed them up. Do not, and if I'm talking to any parents, listen to me.
Yes.
I don't care what your kid calls him or herself. Do not affirm a delusion. You find out what it's about. Don't make a big deal of it, but do not, because you have to know this. If you're a parent and your kid comes home and says, I think I'm a boy, or I think, you have to know this. They are under the spell of somebody, as it were, that's just like a cult. Yep. Somebody is working them. And if you don't understand, the way to understand the trans deception is this. You have to understand how cults and predators work. And you remove porn, and you remove porn's influence from the trans movement, and it will die away back to the numbers of 2005. Essentially, it doesn't exist. This is the greatest man-made psychological scheme and scam that's ever been perpetrated upon vulnerable kids with mental health issues and parental control and rights. That's what this is, and that's why you look at the cities where everything was burning, and interestingly enough, you had Black Lives Matter, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of that, we had Trans Lives Matter. Where did that come from? That didn't come from accident. In each of those cities, there's a major transgender medical clinic. And you take a kid, you start shooting them up with cross-sex hormones, and you fool around with their sex and sexuality, you now have transgressed you've transgressed their intuition, now they're easily manipulated, or you're unleashing herps, porn involved, and now these kids are ripe to be manipulated and wound up and energized, and away they go. Wow. It is the easiest way to bring a society down, because these become the classic useful idiots.
Wow. John, I wish I had like 4 more hours with you, because this is great stuff, and we're going to definitely bring you back on again to do some more deep dives into this kind of stuff, because it is important for America, for the world to hear this stuff and to understand the transition that we're seeing right before our eyes. No pun intended, but our society is literally going through a transition right now with both sexual relations, as we understand it, with the youth, that our kids are coming home from school, and now we're being castigated as the bad parents because we're not affirming what it is that they're being exposed to in that institution. So it's crazy to see. But I want to, while we got like 6 minutes, I want to ask you, in your profession, in what you do day to day. Now, me coming up and being exposed to different avenues of the psychology's profession and all, I tend to run across more liberals in this profession than conservatives. What has been your experience with being a conservative yourself and working with your colleagues that may tend to lean liberal, or do you not have that kind of dynamic?
You're 100% correct, Randy. There's about 98% liberal in my estimation. It's sad. I think what happens is when you're going through school, either by happenstance or I tend to think by strategy, what's happened in higher academia. We all understand, anybody that understands anything about what's happened in academia. Well, one way, and Rockefeller Foundation, right, was smart with this. They targeted the soft sciences, sociology. So you have also women's studies gets in there, but psychology. Why? Because Kinsey knew that how you change society is through psychology, meaning you change the DSM, now you have justification to change legislation and dumb things down. That's why sex offenders aren't getting sentenced the way they used to. So you have a greater collection of very liberal and I would say agenda-driven people within the field of psychology in academia, who kind of screen out, or they will make it very difficult because they can fail you. Right? You're writing papers, and if you don't agree with what they say, or you can't justify it in the right way,
Right.
it'll impact your GPA, and eventually you may not get out, or you get so tired of it. So I think one way or the other, they have screened a lot of people out, or people have just left. So there's very, very few of us out there. It's very sad because what do I mean by us? From a Judeo-Christian perspective, what does that mean? Believing in absolute morals, believing that regardless of culture, and culture is super important. I have folks that I work with from all around the world in different cultures. But I tell you what, certain things don't change. Male and femaleness don't change. You have family dynamics that don't change. You have in-laws and outlaws that don't change. It's very interesting. I'm working with a gentleman from Saudi Arabia who is dating somebody, a fiance from another country. And guess what? We got in-laws and outlaws issues, but in his case, he doesn't want to be honest with his dad. His dad has put pressure on him. Well, welcome to the human right. Those are very human things: money, sex, in-laws, and kids. Wherever you go around the world, those will be the issues.
Yep.
But unless I understand that the buck has to stop somewhere, it stops with dad, then I don't have a sense of structure within the family. I'll think, well, it's everybody has an equal say. No. So the quickest way to destroy a society is get them to begin to depart from what God said as far as the design of the family.
Yep.
And now you have fatherless kids because now dad can let himself off the hook. He can depart. Now you have men spreading their seed all over the place. And how many men in prison have multiple kids, multiple baby daddies, or whatever they call them, and it's sad. And so it really does matter your perspective. And if it shifts away from a Judeo-Christian perspective, then you can define anything the way you want it. And the
That
human
gives
heart does
standards.
not want to have parameters placed upon it. It
Right.
says to itself, do not tell me what I can or can't do, especially when it has to do with sexuality, because I want to be happy. That's primary difference between secular and Christian counseling.
Mm.
By the way, it comes down to two things. What do I believe about the nature of man? Is man basically good and will tend toward goodness, or basically selfish, way down deep inside? And what is the goal? The goal of secular counseling is happiness. What will make me happy? The goal of Judeo-Christian counseling is helping someone choose to do the right thing.
Perfect. Perfect. John, thank you. You can find John Uhler on Friday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern Time right here on TECNTV.com. John, is there anything like a special message or anything you want to send out in the last 2 minutes here?
Well, I want to thank you, Randy. It's been a pleasure. It's fun to be able to be on, with another fellow host.
Yes.
But I would say if anybody wants to learn more about the effects of trauma they themselves have gone through or somebody else, survivorsupport.net is a resource for you. So I would encourage you to go there, spend some time. If you are a pastor and you want to learn about what, all things being equal, a significant percentage, 25, I think about 40% of your congregation has been impacted by the crossing of sexual boundaries. And we have a lot of crazy making going on in families, and we cannot support the crazy makers. We have to begin to support those that are trying to do their best under selfish people. We have to hold selfish people accountable. And on that site, you'll learn how to do that as well.
Awesome. 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 Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for tuning in today. And John, I appreciate you once again. This was fantastic. Like I said, definitely bring you back again, probably really soon, because I know some more crazy stuff is going to pop up, and so we're going to need your expertise and to explain it to us like what's going on, so we don't lose our minds. Because
Not true.
I'm like almost already there. I'm like, okay, calm down, just just let it play out. But yes, we will see you all on Friday, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But thank you all for tuning in once again, and we will see you all whenever we see you. So take care. God bless you all, and see you later.
You are listening to the Exceptional Conservative Network. For more information, go to www.theexceptionalconservativeshow.com.